Welcome to the High Agency Podcast with your host, Noah Ravoy.
Good morning. To rebuild the West, we must first rebuild ourselves, and that starts with taking full responsibility for our lives. And whatever your mind dwells on, that's what you're going to become. So when you think like a winner and you act like a winner, then you become one. But exactly how do we do that? How do we take control of our lives? Today's guest is Sonmez from Bulldog Mindset, a man who took control of his own life and now helps others to grow as people and maximize their potential in life. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Noah. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. A lot of male people in the manosphere or the male advice space, we talk about taking personal responsibility, and very few actually talk about how to do that. And one of the things that I really appreciate listening to your material is you give people instructions on how to do it. I think it's intuitive for some men, and for a lot of men or most men, it's actually not so intuitive, and they need some guidance. Could you tell me a little bit about, perhaps how you made a big change? Because you're a lot different than you used to be. You've really improved yourself a lot, and how those lessons can transfer to others.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is really, for me, it was getting rid of the victim mindset of thinking that, things are not my fault. It's someone else's fault. It's women's fault. It's society's fault. And even when it seems like it is, right? So one of the things that I talk about a lot is the idea that, there's a such thing as a valid excuse, but it's still an excuse. It still doesn't get you what you want, right? And when you think about it, from almost like a game of chess, like life is a game of chess, it doesn't really matter what the positions of the pieces on the board are, right? You can get upset about that. You can say, well, it's not my fault, I didn't have a choice. And those things may be true, but the only thing that matters is actually what you do given that information, right? Your emotional response to it, whether it's your fault or not, it doesn't actually matter. It only matters what you do. And for me, that was the big thing that really changed in my mindset, was once I realized that it doesn't matter if it's my fault. It doesn't matter if I'm angry about it. It doesn't matter if it's unfair. Only matters what is the most strategic thing that I can do in this situation. That's when, I start to really take full responsibility for everything in my life. And that's where I start to have that agency to actually change things, because if it's outside of my control, I mean, this goes way back to, I think I first encountered this concept in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and, Stephen Covey, where he talked about, your spheres of influence. And it's like, if I focus on things that are outside of my control, then I can't make any kind of change. And if I have something that is not my responsibility and it's not in my control, if I give someone else the power, or give the world the power, or give women the power, whatever it is, then I have no ability to change that thing. And so I have no agency. And so that was really the big thing for me, was shifting that mindset to start to say, okay, it doesn't really matter how we got here. Here's where we are right now, John. And like, if you want to do something or change something in your life, you've got to take the action, regardless of, forget about fault, forget about responsibility and blame or anything. You have to take full responsibility at this point, because it's your ship that you're sailing at this point. And so that was really the thing, the catalyst that shifted, that caused all these other transformations. Because once I had made that mindset shift, now I had so much agency in my life. Now I had the power to change and influence my life instead of being a victim of circumstances, right? And I think that a lot of guys today, they think that they're powerless, and it's because they've given up their power. Because as soon as you blame someone else, you give them your power.
Yeah, you mentioned that, mindset is extremely important. And almost everything that I teach, I start off with, either I call it mindset, or I say, get your mind straight. Because our thoughts, or our actions, follow our thoughts. And in fact, that's how we often got into a bad pattern in the first place. We picked up from someone else their thought patterns. A lot of men are raised by single mothers. They're the big, super victim category. And so they like to complain a lot about their victim status. And if that's where you're raised, that programming rubs off on you over time. And it's very hard while you're still a young man, it's subjected to that programming to get out of it, because we are social creatures, which means we tend to adapt to the dominant social narrative. And the younger we are, And the more agreeable we are, the harder it is to go against that narrative, because we feel like it's what we have to do just to survive. And then we get this shift. We, as men, we move out from our parents' place. Even sometimes you have a father, you still end up with that because he's unactive. He's, he's there, but he's not really a man. He's, another kid of your mother's, basically. And we move out, and all of a sudden things shift. And now, when we're a kid and we blame someone for something, probably our parents end up taking the responsibility for that. They end up doing something for us. And then we're out of home, and it's like all the protections have been cut. No one's going to take responsibility for us anymore. And that is a huge shock to a lot of young men. And I think this is the big reason why a lot of young men get depressed somewhere around 18 to 21. There's a lot of depression, a lot of psychosis and things happen in those age groups, because they go from essentially being a child to being expected to behave, or at least get the results of an adult overnight. And it doesn't have to be that way. One of the groups, I've actually had a lot of single mothers come to me and say, I know this is not optimal for raising my kids. I don't want to be a single mom anymore, but I don't want to get married again and then divorced. So where do I get masculine influence for my sons, for my teenage sons? And I think guys like you and me, we're not just providing something to fix people who've got damage through trauma or whatever. We're here also to prevent it. This is a good place. There's never been, I don't think, in recent history, so many men with such a positive agency building message out there that young guys who don't have masculine role models could go and look to.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. It's interesting too, just thinking about that transition from childhood, from boyhood to manhood, and really it's I think a lot of people think it has to take place, but it doesn't have to take place. It's not a natural process. It has to be orchestrated. It has to come about with the right circumstances, just like a seed is not guaranteed to germinate, right? You have to have water, you have to have the nutrients that are required for it. Just having the seed doesn't mean that it will germinate. And that's the same thing. And that's, like you're saying, I think that's what men like us are able to provide for not just, young boys growing up, but for men, adult boys who haven't gone through that process. And I speak from experience, knowing that I hadn't gone through that process. I was probably 30 years old. I had not gone through that process of transitioning from boyhood to manhood. It actually took some guidance and me discovering sort of the masculine role models out there, doing a lot of reading, do a lot of self-introspection in order to finally find that, and then to realize and make that transition. And it's also interesting, like what you said about childhood. I was thinking the other day about, like, I got sick. And, I think maybe the first time in life that you start to realize that you are responsible for yourself is when you're an adult and you get really sick. Because as a child, you have this viewpoint of your parents can take care of everything. They can save you. You're basically invulnerable as long as you have parents, because they can fix anything, they can cure anything. You know what I mean? They're going to take care of you. But as you are an adult and then you get sick, you realize it's like, no, I could die. like I could call my mom on the phone. It doesn't matter. There's nothing she can do for me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm responsible for this. I better go find a doctor. I better go figure this out. And that, I think that's a very shocking realization, because we're used to having that safety. But that is really the truth of being a man, is that you are responsible. Like, there is no one you can turn to. And I think that so many young guys today, they're misguided, because they're like, well, I can turn to the government, or I can turn to the police, or I can turn to whatever authority, or they still have this delusion that their parents can somehow fix everything. In fact, a lot of them are still living with their parents, living out that delusion. And the reality of the situation is, no, it's up to you. I like to tell guys all the time, it's kind of harsh, but no one gives a fuck about you. No one cares. What I mean? And this is the harsh reality of life, is that, people will say they care, and it doesn't mean you can't have friends and that people can't be beneficial to your life. But when it really comes down to the brass tacks, no one really cares if you have a good life. No one cares if you find a good relationship with a woman. No one cares if you make money, if you live up to your potential. No one really cares about that stuff except for you. And so if you want that stuff, you've got to take responsibility for it. Otherwise, it's not just going to get handed to you. You're not going to get it just because you, quote, deserve it. It's something that you really have to take responsibility for. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and to the extent that anyone actually does love you or care about you, it's never going to be more than you love and care about yourself. Yeah. Because, with the possible exception of men caring more for their wives sometimes than the women care for themselves, that's the one possible exception. But for men, no one will care about you more than you care about yourself, because they're going to look at how much you take care of yourself and how much you care for yourself. And they're going to say, look, if he's not willing to invest in himself, he must know something I don't know. Yep. So I'm not going to invest in him either. And vice versa. If you invest in yourself, other people will say, look, I like what you're doing. I like how you're taking care of yourself. I like the projects you're involved in. I like the programs you're running. How do I also invest in these things? And so it comes along. The world starts to mold to us the more that we take care of ourselves, because we're signaling to the world that we're worth investing in. And not only us, but the things that we care about are worth investing in. And I think it's a very underrated way to influence the world is simply by taking care of yourself. For a lot of people, that seems, I'm selfish. I'm putting myself first and taking care of myself first. That's selfishness. But it's not. It's setting a good example. And setting a poor example is the ultimate form of selfishness, because you're depriving others of what they need, a pattern. Most people, they need to see a pattern of how to behave and then imitate it. Few men are going to come to the conclusion on their own. You don't learn how to be a man by reading books or watching YouTube videos or even taking courses. What you do is you get a hypothesis of what it means to be a man, and then you go and you test that hypothesis out in the world, and you go, hey, that works. That works. Everything's better about my life because I manned up. And, we get those hypotheses from other people generally. Very few of us are going to reinvent the wheel. Pretty much everything in masculinity has already been tried. And so we need to have someone that sets patterns for us that we can go. And, there might be some people that connect with one masculine figure and not another as their pattern. And we need to find the ones that fit well within our needs.
Yeah, I like what you said about the selfishness too. This is one of those things also I think that is so important to understand, is this idea that you cannot give what you do not have. And so really, there's so many guys out there that are lacking, and especially you look at nice guy syndrome. Nice guy syndrome is all about trying to make some kind of a sacrifice, right? It's giving what you don't have. It's essentially giving love so that you can get love, and as opposed to love coming from the overflow that is within you because you've loved yourself first. And I know this sounds real new agey and soft, but truly, I've said this a few times to different guys, which have shocked them, so that man's greatest gift, the greatest gift that you can give to this world as a man, is your love. And so you have to know how to love yourself first. You have to be selfish to some degree and put yourself first, so that all those needs of yourself are met, and then you can go out into the world and you can give freely. Because if you're lacking and you then try to go out and you try to give to another person, it's a selfish kind of giving, because you're expecting something in return. Whereas if it's coming from an overflow, because you're already confident with yourself, you already have taken care of yourself, you've already been, quote, selfish, then there's no strings attached, because you're giving because you have an excess of resources, right? And when you lack those resources, you can't give, and that's the problem. And it's so many guys get caught into that nice guy trap, and they wonder why. And the reason why is because they're trying to give what they don't have. They're trying to get something in return, and it's very transparent when you do that. And that's where neediness comes from, and that's where we see guys that get walked all over, that are all heartbroken, that do all these things because they're always expecting something in return. But guys like to compare it to say, oh well, the asshole always gets the girls or whatever, and it's like, no, it's more of that the guy that you classify as an asshole, he took care of himself first. He's met all of his needs, and so he doesn't come across as needy, because when he's in interaction with you, it's straightforward. It might not be an interaction that is beneficial to you, he might come off as crude or rude or whatever it is, or whatever, you know, attribute you want to apply, but it's genuine. Whereas a lot of guys that are nice guys, their interactions aren't genuine because they're saying one thing at a surface level, but in reality, that neediness is coming out, and it's making it so that you feel like you're obligated in some way. They're doing something for you because they want something back, and it might just be as simple as validation. They may just want you to validate them because they don't have a self validation in place. But I think that's a really, really important concept.
Yeah, the transactional relationship. One of the big problems is for these nice guys, a lot of times it doesn't get returned to them. So not only are they giving from a deficit, they're increasing the deficit as they give more because they're not getting enough back. They're not getting any really return on their investment. And because they're being manipulative, because they're being dishonest, women have a good gut instinct for that. They may not understand exactly what's happening, but they have this gut instinct. Something isn't right. Something is unnatural there. And so they'll pull back. And I think this is the reason, you know, if you list what the nice guy is doing, it sounds great. You know, oh, he's taking care of us. Actually disgusts women, and it's the dishonesty that they get disgusted with. There's something about that triggers their disgust response. And I know females that I've been coaching. They say they go on a date with this guy. Everything sounded great in the, you know, the messages, everything, until they met him physically and they spent some time with him, and they say something's off. Yeah. They can't put their finger on it. And I'm like, yep, he's a nice guy, isn't he? Oh yeah, he's really nice. I'm like, a nice guy, eh? Think about that for a second, what you're saying. Yeah. And then they think about it and they're like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, he's hiding something, you know? Yeah. Someone mentioned it's not a genuine offer. It comes across as a bribe. Yeah. Exactly. Nobody wants to have the idea that their virtue is being compromised by a bribe.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, you can't be genuine unless you're selfish to a degree, right? Because that, you know, being genuine, being authentic means that when I say something, it's not just at a surface level, it's what I truly mean. And I can't do that if I have some ulterior motive, right? So, and that's where, you know, coming across as being someone who's a nice guy, it always is the fact that you've got something else underneath. So it can't be genuine. It's not authentic. It's like, you know, it would be better to tell someone the truth than to tell someone a lie because you want to gain their approval or you don't want to hurt their feelings or whatever it is. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. Just like, you know, like you're saying in the example, you know, girl goes on a date with this guy. He's doing all these things for her. He's not really doing them all for her. He's doing them because he wants that approval. He wants her to like him. Whereas, you know, if he were confident in himself, if he didn't have that lack, then he would just, you know, if she did something that he didn't like, he would say, I don't like this. It doesn't have to be an asshole, but he would express his wants and desires. And that's the other, you know, piece of it is too. It's like you kind of, as a nice guy, you suppress all of your wants and desires because you believe that you're not worthy of them. And so no one else will believe that you're worthy of them either. And so they're not just going to give them to you. Again, it comes back, you know, full circle to what we were talking about childhood, because when you're a child, as a boy, your wants and desires, your parents fulfill them sometimes preemptively. You know, you don't have to go and get them fulfilled yourself. And I think that's kind of that same mode that a lot of guys that never grow up, that they operate in. They're like, well, if I make certain noises, if I and I you know, and I express my, like, I'm hurt, you know what I mean, or, you know, it's like crying like a baby, you know, if I do this in the ways that I know how to, or if I'm really, really nice, or if I really, you know, do this thing, then I'm gonna get my needs taken care of, instead of just saying what your needs and your desires are. You know, and so I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, and a big part of with the needs and desires too is that women, when you date a woman and she really likes you, she wants to know how to make you happy.
Right.
And if you're not being honest and genuine about your needs and desires, even if you're not being a nice guy, but you're just not being genuine about what you need, you're not giving her anywhere to get traction to try to please you. You're not giving her that opportunity to demonstrate that she actually cares about you. And so it is it kills that opportunity for having a reciprocal relationship. A lot of people talk about so there's reciprocal relationships and transactional. Transactional is, I'm going to trade you this for this. Reciprocal is that you each put in an amount of effort into it, not because you require the other one, oh, you must put in X amount of effort, but it's because you both have desire for the relationship to grow, and so you both invest into it. And you may both, people say it's 50-50. Well, sometimes it's 100-100. You're both investing in full, it's got to be full in, and you get back more than both get back more than you invested in. That's an ideal reciprocal relationship. There needs, if you don't have a kind of return on investment on a relationship, you eventually get bored of it. And I think that happens to everybody. If they're not getting out of that relationship enough joy to justify the work and effort of put into it, they're not going to stick with it. And I think a lot of marriages break up because people stop investing, but a lot of times it's because they just stop being clear with each other about what they want.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
I think all of this, a lot of these things, that starts out in the dating stage. People in the dating stage, they mess up. They're not honest with their feelings. They get married anyway, and then you can't build a long-term relationship on those kind of lies. So eventually it breaks up. Whatever patches they put on it to hold it off, it eventually breaks anyway. What would you suggest? You have on your website, you have a form there for people to fill out. And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I sort of developed this Bulldog mindset quiz to kind of as a just quick way that I could assess where you are in your life, right? And so there's questions about kind of all the areas for a man, everything from like how many books do you read in a month, right? Because I know that someone who reads books, a lot of books, is probably going to be really successful in life. They're probably going to at least stumble upon the wisdom that they need to have as a man to be successful in life. There's questions about, your financial well-being, like where you're at. Also about, could you approach a woman that you found attractive on the street? Do you have trouble with that? Is that something that would make you really scared, or that you've never done before? Your physical fitness, are you working out? Are you running? Are you going to the gym? Right? Are you doing all those things? And then kind of the mental toughness aspect, right? Is it that can you sit down and actually get something done that you set your mind to, or do you have to go and watch TV, get distracted by YouTube, and not actually accomplish your goals? So I kind of tried to find like all the questions, and really I base this off of really where I was before to where I am now, because I know my own transformation, and I know that guys are probably going to struggle in many of these areas. And I know that these are the areas that help me to improve. So I kind of use that as an assessment in order to figure out where someone is. And then I give a score from 0 to 100 there based on those questions. And then that gives me an idea of where, especially when I'm working with guys, where we need to focus and in what level that they need to get to. But I find it works pretty well, right? To have some kind of rule of thumb. And there's certain of those key things. Like I said, one of the key things that is books, right? Someone who's well-read probably is going to be a lot more successful than the normal person. If someone's reading more than 10 books a year, that level is it's one of those things that it doesn't always mean that someone's going to be more successful, but it's such a good indicator that I use that all the time.
I think a lot of times if they're reading a lot of books, it's not just the books they're reading, it's the things they're not doing during the time they're reading the books. They're not watching propaganda that weakens them and emasculates them. They're not playing video games which keep them in a kind of sensory overload. At the same time, it narcoticizes them so that they don't actually want to go and get any real advancement in life. Or porn. They're not looking at porn, they're reading books. They're not getting that kind of warped sense of the world. And it's better to read a book than do almost anything else, even if the book isn't the ideal one to improve you. And I usually give my clients some suggestions of books they can read, because it does help to focus your mind as well. It takes, if you want to read a good thick book and you want to read it in a reasonable period of time, you got to sit down and you got to focus on it, and you got to block out everything else. And that does build mental toughness. There are exercises to build mental toughness, and they're almost all involve focusing. Exercises focusing, Running is focusing, like you were doing before, some marathons. All of that requires a lot of focus, and so does reading. I think that's a big part of why it helps you, is because you have to control your mind. Whereas when you watch programming, television shows and whatnot, they're in control of your mind, and you can just relax and let everything spin. And that's, it's fine if you want to do that occasionally, but if that's your de facto entertainment, then when you turn the screen off, don't be surprised if you can't use your mind for anything, because all it's used to be doing is being led around. Yeah. You're good at being led. You're not very good at leading, not even your own mind, leading in your own mind. And it's, I tell my son that it makes you stupid. Yeah. Screens make you stupid, because, you gotta simplify it down for a 7-year-old. Screens make you stupid, and doing stuff makes you smarter. If you sit down all the time and never move, your body will deteriorate. If you rest your mind all the time, your mind deteriorates as well. So it really is, the reading is, I think, very underestimated. Everyone says, "Oh, read so many books," and they think it's because of what you're getting out of the books, and that's part of it. It's also what you're not getting.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I actually have this 70-30 rule that I give a lot of the guys that I work with, where what it basically is that you should spend 30% of your time consuming and 70% producing, right? Because if you're a producer, that like you said, that's actually where you get the most growth. That's actually where you learn, because you can gain knowledge from reading books, but understanding comes from the practical application of that knowledge. And there's such a difference between knowledge and understanding. You can memorize multiplication tables. That's knowledge. You can understand how multiplication works. That's the understanding, and that's way more powerful, because it's going to carry you a lot further. And so, yeah, having that 70-30 rule I think is really critical. It's like, you need to be producing. Even, guys say all the time, "Well, I'm not making a YouTube channel or a blog or anything like that." My answer is, well, why not start one? But even if you're not, even if you're just producing, even if you're producing is just that you're writing a book that no one will ever read, or you're writing it down, or you're making a PowerPoint slide to give to your dog. I mean, this is how you actually really process the information that you have and test it out. And that's, or coming up with your own, theories and your own philosophy of life. Even, Seneca, I know in Seneca's letters to Lucilius, he talks about this idea of these philosophers that are really schooled in other people's texts. And he says, "Well, where's your own philosophy? Like, you're just a muppet, essentially. Like, you need to have your own philosophy. Why haven't you written down your own thing? Where's your own original thought? Just talking about what other people talk about is nothing. Like, every man should have his own life philosophy. And sure, you're going to gather things from other places, but then when it comes down to it, it's like, what do you actually think?" And I think that's one of the things also that is lacking so much in men today, is this sense of judgment, of their own judgment, right? Because we're so used to deciding whether things are good or bad based on the court of public opinion, right? I mean, you look at social media, right? It's all driven by likes now, right? So it's like, okay, this must be good because I got thumbs ups from other people, right? As opposed to really one of the core pieces or requirements of being a man is to have your own value system and your own judgment be number one. So instead of going out and saying, "Here's my thing, do you think this is good?" to the world, instead saying, "It doesn't matter what they say. Do I think this is good? Do I value this?" Right? Because that's the key. And so that's a good way to practice that too, is to become that producer where you make your judgment about the thing, as opposed to having everyone else tell you whether something is good or whether you're good. And if you're constantly, in that feedback loop, you're never going to have that true agency.
Yeah, absolutely. I often get guys say to me, "Well, I'll trust my judgment better when my judgment is improved. Right now I don't trust it so much. It'll get better, and then I'll trust it." And it's the other way around. First, you need to trust your judgment, go out and test whether it was good or not, and then, "Oh, okay, that wasn't exactly correct. Next time it'll be better." And it's that actual application of your judgment in the real world that improves it. A lot of people will say afterwards, "Oh yeah, I kind of knew that was wrong," or "I knew that was a bad idea," or "I knew I should have bought Bitcoin 10 years ago," or whatever it was. And it's like, okay, great. You knew that. Okay, how's that going to impact your next decision?
Right. The whole concept I believe in is really important is the idea of strong beliefs but loosely held. Right. It's this idea of like you speak with conviction, because if you believe that this is correct at this point, then speak like it is, right? Don't be iffy, don't be, it's part of being decisive. And then you're subject to revision. We're all wrong at different times. And as long as you're open to that, it doesn't mean that you should be iffy. I think so many guys are like, well, I'm not sure. I don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. It's like, no, go all in. Whatever your gut says, whatever your judgment is at this point, go all in with it. Just be willing to be corrected if you're wrong. Be willing to revise because no one wants to follow a weak leader who is on the fence. It's like, well, I'm not sure about this, and I don't want to lead you in the wrong direction. No, people would rather be led in the wrong direction and then have you tell them, well, you know what, I made a mistake here. Let's course correct, because at least you're following someone who you feel like has some level of confidence. Because you don't have confidence in yourself, no one is going to have confidence in you. And I think, like you're saying, so many guys are kind of pontificating so much, like, I'm not quite there yet. I don't have my judgment. But it's like, it's the whole gatekeeper thing is no one is going to suddenly, take a scepter and crown you king. You have to take the crown upon and put it on your own head and decide that you are a man. Because if you're waiting for that judgment to mature, for someone else from the outside world, some gatekeeper to say you're good enough now, it's never going to happen. You have to take that up. And that's the battle. That's the battle, I think, of becoming a man, of not knowing that the path in front of you is secure, of not knowing where it's going to go, of knowing that you could trip, that you could fall, that you could even be going the wrong direction, but taking action anyway.
And I think if you're producing stuff, you're really going to see that, because you're going to look back on what you produced a year ago, 2 years ago. I remember as a kid, I had a diary, would write down what I did, what I thought about things. And I would read the diary a year later and I go, oh my God, I got to burn this. This is embarrassing.
Yeah.
I was such a kid here, and 1 year difference. And then I remember writing there, how my diary from last year is so embarrassing. The next year reading that and going, oh yeah, everything I wrote last year was also embarrassing. And it kind of clicked that never ends, and it shouldn't end. Sometimes I still read stuff that I wrote a few years ago and say, yeah, that sounds pretty good, but this and this and this should be better. And that's perfectly fine. Should have some growth and improvement. I had some feminists look at all of the things that I'd written. They must have spent a day or two looking at everything I've ever produced, watching all my videos, everything I wrote. And then they come up to me with a bunch of contradictions in my work. And they're like, you said this, and then you said this, and those things contradict each other. Do you believe them both? And I'm like, yeah, actually, I probably do believe those two things, and they do appear to contradict, and I'm not really sure how to make them work, but they both are rational and make sense, And that ability sometimes to recognize that we have two apparently conflicting ideas, because the greater truth is big enough to unite them together, but we haven't pieced that together yet, and to realize we don't have all the information we need, but we have enough to decide. I think that's really what the essence of being a man is that you don't have all the information, but you're still the one responsible for deciding what to do next.
Exactly.
And you take that responsibility on and you decide, and if you screw up, you fix it.
One of my favorite quotes actually on the contradictions is the Walt Whitman quote, and he says, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. and I love it, because so many people try to get you on that contradicting yourself, and contradicting yourself is a sure sign of growth. It's like you should constantly be contradicting yourself over time, because you should be growing. If you have the same viewpoint that you had last year or the year before, I mean, there are some things that obviously that won't change and that will become refined, but having contradictions is not a weak point. And like you said, a lot of times those things appear to contradict themselves, but when you dig a little bit deeper, then you have to kind of explore it and say, well, why are these things appear to be a contradiction? There must be some deeper root that connects both of these things, and sometimes that leads you to a much more profound truth.
And the more decisive your conversation, so the more decisive you explain things, the more general the more specific it becomes, the easier it is to find contradictions. Because if you're giving advice to a specific person about a specific situation and you're being very bold and blunt with them, You'll get someone else and you'll give them completely different advice. Their situation was different. It's not always us changing. It's the situation around us changing. How you're going to behave in, if you live in a country with a lot of freedoms, and then you move to a country, or your country becomes one without a lot of freedoms, your behavior must change. Perhaps your beliefs don't change a lot, but your problem solving method changes. You can't necessarily say things in the ideal way you'd like to say them. You find other ways to achieve your goals. And really, as men, we have to become the man we must be for the situation we're in, and recognize that even though everything's up to us, we don't control the universe. We're still little specks, and we must operate within that framework that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That talks to one of I think another important concept, which is that of understanding power dynamics, which is something that seems to be sorely lacking in the world today. It's so funny, I mean, a really good book is 48 Laws of Power. And I see so many people contradicting those laws today, especially when you see people just blatantly putting out their agenda instead of hiding what their actual agenda is. It's surely a way to allow your enemy to prepare their battle plan against you, but it comes from an emotional response, I think, a lot of times. And just even this whole thing, you see like all the things going on in the world with the protests and all of these things that a great example right now, just the whole GameStop thing that just blew up here. And it was like, yeah, we're going to stick it to the hedge fund guys. And I'm like, I'm all for sticking for the hedge fund guys. But, on day one, I could kind of get on board with that. On day two, you got to realize that you caught some hedge fund guys by surprise, but now you have, a room full of multi-billionaires sitting here who have studied the markets for years, and you think that you're going to fight them by telling them what your strategy is. I'm like, all right, this is just, but it comes from this emotional response and not understanding power dynamics, right? It's not understanding that, like you're saying, maybe you're in a foreign country and you don't have the right of free speech. Okay, well, you can go out there and you can try and exercise your right of free speech, and you can get arrested and go to jail and never be seen from again. And you haven't done anything. You've stood there and you've asserted your right, but you didn't understand the power dynamics in the situation. You didn't understand that you're not effective, right? Because you have to know when you're in a position of power and you're not. And unless, again, like I see so many times in the world today, is men not understanding those power dynamics, not understanding that, hey, yeah, there's nothing wrong. It's a little bit of Sun Tzu, The Art of War would help, but there's nothing wrong with retreating strategically when you're in a position of weakness, as opposed to just pressing on and getting slaughtered. And I see that so much where again, maybe this speaks to the idea of like understanding authority. It's the same kind of principles. It's like when you're a man, you have to both know how to lead and how to follow. And there's certain positions where you have to follow. And, when I look at men who cannot follow, I know that they're not going to be good leaders, because they don't understand power dynamics. They don't understand when they're in a position of subordination that they need to play out that role as best as possible. But when they're in that position of power, then they have to, show some, some magnanimity, right? Magnanimity. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah. But yeah. So anyway, I think that's just another.
Speaking of authority and power, I think most people nowadays are recognizing there's some illegitimate aspects to, national authorities and even international authorities. A lot of them have demonstrated their illegitimacy. And the answer that people give is, let's undermine the existing authority. And all they're going to do is create a vacuum of power. And vacuums of power tend to suck up the very worst of humanity and send them straight up to the top. And we have individuals who can't run their own life, trying to undermine society, trying to undermine any authority that they do find. And what we're doing, helping people to be stronger, that really is the solution. I believe that agency, especially agency amongst men, is the answer to the problems we have. Because if we could create that power vacuum, we'd end up worse afterwards than we are now, instead of individually strengthening ourselves and then starting to network together. High agency men, Men who have, as you say, the Bulldog mindset, these type of men tend to find each other, tend to cooperate, work together, create institutions, create community, and to build and to grow and to create things. And we have a society that was undermined because men were sufficiently weak that we allowed our institutions to be undermined. The counter to that is to strengthen up men so that they stop allowing the undermining to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I think that it's a really good point that you made about men who don't even have their own life together, trying to storm the Capitol, or to try to undermine power, and it's really it's the top down approach. So many guys are taking this top down approach, saying, okay, let's topple this existing power system. This is unfair, but they're not in a position of power, so they can't really even be effective, right? But the approach that we're taking is the bottom up approach. We're making strong men at the bottom, knowing that having a strong base of men is the only way to truly change society and to really truly change who is in power and what kind of authority is in place. And that's really the key. And maybe we don't succeed at doing that because we don't have enough numbers, but at least if you fail with our bottom up approach, you have improved the lives of many men, many individuals, and the people that they impact in their lives, the women that are in their lives, their children, their friends. And that is really what ultimately counts, right? Because ultimately, we can be angry at different authority systems. I think so many people believe that they have freedoms that they don't. Right. It became very clear, I think, in this last year that freedoms that we thought we had, we did not actually have. But that was always the truth. It was always there. We just were unaware of it. Now it's not like we've lost freedoms. We've just become made aware of the freedom that we didn't have. But there's two ways of looking at that. One way is to say, oh, this is horrible. Life is horrible. Life is unfair. We need to fix this and rebel against this. And I can agree with some of those sentiments, but the other viewpoint is to say, look, okay, given my constraints, what is the best way I can have a life for myself within these constraints, right? So it's almost, I'd posited to one man who was really upset about this, and I said, look, imagine that you're a slave, okay, that you're born a slave, that you have no real chance of freedom, okay. How would you live your life? Are you going to spend your entire life being angry about being a slave? Again, not that it's a great condition that anyone should be in, but if it is your lot, then should you not figure out how to optimize your life as a slave to the best of your ability, to you exercise what agency that you do have and possess in order to make the best life for yourself as possible as a slave? And I know that's an extreme example, but to some degree, we are already in slavery. I mean, if you live in the United States or any Western country, you're paying a larger degree in taxes than serfs paid to their lords in feudal times. I mean, they paid 25%, and we're paying upwards of 50%. So in to a very large degree, you are a slave, and so you can fight and say, well, whatever. And again, I'm not saying that there's not a time for rebellion and fighting and banding together and overturning dictatorships or corrupt power systems, but that requires you to have enough power to do it. But for the most part, for most men, what's going to be more beneficial in their lives is not to even really worry about that so much, but to worry about getting their own house in order and everything that they can control, everything that they have true agency over. And that's going to affect their life a lot more than who's the president or what kind of laws there are or what the tax rate is.
Yeah, an easy example is that a lot of people are saying, I can't date now because of COVID.
Yeah.
So COVID it's impossible to date. So before COVID, what were you doing? I also wasn't dating.
Exactly.
How do you know you can't date under COVID? You haven't been trying. You haven't been going on dates before. Definitely aren't looking for them now. And so it really is what can I do given the situation? And if you are rebelling, what's your best return on investment rebellion? What's the safe way to rebel? The Italians are doing a great job of it. Italian restaurateurs got together, 50,000 of them. Okay, so now they have a structure. They have power. These are already successful men. They own, and women, they own restaurants. They have employees. They have contacts. They already have some structure. I noticed in Southern Europe here, a lot of restaurants will cooperate with each other to mass buy products to get cheaper prices. You don't really see individual owner operated restaurants doing that in North America. But here they tend to already work together in structures for economic reasons. And now they've decided for political reasons to come even into a larger group. So now they have power. Now they have a structure. They've created some legitimate authority that can stand up to an authority which is curtailing their rights, or you could call them privileges, because if it's a right, they can't take it away. If it's a privilege, they can. So, and they've gotten traction. They've gotten the Italian government to back down on things, but it didn't start with rebellion, and it didn't start with demands. It started with them having agency to make a life where they had power, and then them having the sense to talk to each other and to federate together and to cooperate and work together. And I think one of the biggest problems in Western civilization right now is that people do not cooperate with each other. They don't work together. The closest thing you'll get to that is a spontaneous mob, and they're only working for destruction, which is an easier task than construction, than creating. But it's very hard now to create an entity of individuals that come together to build something. And when you find that, it's absolutely magical. It's golden. And so that I believe is due to the low agency of people. They get into a group and nothing's their responsibility. They can't lead themselves. They're definitely not going to lead in a group. And nothing is their responsibility, and they don't know how to follow. As you mentioned earlier, men need to know how to follow as well. And as we will never have the ability to create new institutions to replace the corrupt or dying or gone institutions until we have that right mindset, that high level of agency that's necessary for us to lead our own lives and to cooperate with each other. I mean, this is why men of agency tend to find each other and work together on projects, is because they don't want to work with everybody else. They don't want to work with low agency people.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, it's interesting, it's a subject I like to harp on a lot, but I'm going to keep on beating this drum until more men hear this message, is that we have this issue within the quote manosphere today, right? We have so many factionalized groups. We're already like, when you look at our group of men within this community, to the rest of the world looking out, like looking in on us, they don't see any differences. They just see a bunch of sexist guys. That's what that's what they see. They don't like, oh, well, this guy's MGTOW and this one's incel and this one's black pill and this guy is red pill and or whatever it is, or these guys are 21 convention, these are Roll Zero guys, or they don't see any of that stuff. They just see a bunch of misogynistic assholes, right? That's what they see. And so for us to like split into these factions to constantly be warring against each other is kind of ridiculous in the sense that, again, it's good to have debate, discussion, to have different viewpoints and to put that out there. It's because that's how we grow as men, by pushing against each other. But the level of animosity, what we're doing to hurt ourselves in our cause is sort of ridiculous at this point, because if we all banded together, if we all, even if we don't agree on all things, but if we can be civil as men and really reunite as the, I don't really like the term manosphere, but there's no better term, so I'll use it. But if we can reunite, then we can have a lot more power, just like you said, the restaurateurs in Italy, that they're able to change things. But there's this real potential for this power here, and that's, it's so key. Like you said, the power dynamics. I mean, that's a great example of it. But yeah, it's a drum that I'm going to keep on beating, because I feel like it's such there's such a missed opportunity here, because there's so much drama going on. And I know a lot of guys that are in, again, I don't take sides on any of this stuff, but I would like to see it resolved so that we can just actually have that power that is available to us right here, but we're not utilizing it.
Yeah, it is true. Working together is very important. And I think if you do have, if there are entities that believe other people in the group are bad actors expose themselves over time.
Yes. And
that is, it becomes clearer as things go on. And so, I think we're seeing a shakeup, and it's like any shakeup, at some point, everything will shake out. Mm-hmm. And some people will shake right out, and who's left will reunite. But I've been a part of large groups before, entities that were in the millions, and that was actually a pretty common thing. It worked out about every 15 years. There would be a lot of growth, and then about every 15 years, it would stall because there would be internal conflict amongst people that were taking the leads in the group. And there would be splits, there would be fractures. Everything would get cleaned up eventually, take a couple of years. And then afterwards, the growth would happen again. And I wonder if that's probably, from my own experience, I think that's almost necessary in any community. And the reason is because everyone who survives the purge, you might say, everyone who decides to stick with the mission post-purge, they're twice as dedicated to it as there was before. The time of trouble creates a kind of rededication inside of you to accomplish the thing you wanted to accomplish. If everything's too easy, we don't tend to get really dedicated to things that are easy. It's too easy to do it. It's too easy to give up. And when things get hard and we have, internal conflicts, whether it's inside ourselves or between people that we're working with, after that, we are more dedicated to the cause than we were before. And I wonder if it's part of what's necessary in healthy organizations.
And I agree to a degree. I think there is some need for some internal conflict. I believe the healthy way for that to be resolved is through debate, discussion, through not through drama, right? I think the part that I dislike is the drama that we have right now, calling people out by name, specifically attacking people, as opposed to attacking their ideas or just letting it shake out. Like you said, I think that as you have people speak and you create an open forum and you have that communication, people will understand who are the bad actors. Like you said, it will shake out by itself. We don't need to facilitate that process by pointing by pointing at people, because the problem with that is that everyone to some degree has, and I think it's magnified by social media, right? Because if you're all men standing together in a room, you're going to have conflicts, right? But with social media, you're able to find the one bad thing someone said or did, and you're able to point that out, and you're able to create a narrative around that. And I think that's a real danger that we have here, because we have a lot more in common as men than we do that's not in common. Again, I'm saying this fully aware that I disagree with a lot of viewpoints and philosophies, but I think it's more important for us to debate those philosophies and those ideas as opposed to the people. And what will happen is that the correct or the most true philosophies, the most practical, let's say not true, let's say practical or effective philosophies, those will rise to the top, and those will gain adoption, as opposed to singling out individuals. Because what we don't want to have, and what I feel like we do have right now, are small cults, right, that are based on the leader's charisma and the idea of creating enemies out of other people. And that is a dangerous place to be, in my opinion. I think it's better if we have schools, right? Schools are fine, right? I believe this philosophy, I understand, I relate to this, as opposed to cults. And I don't know, maybe it's a blurry line, but I feel like we're moving more into that territory, and that's the thing that I'm against. I feel like if we're having open debates, if we're having open discussions, not just shutting people out, that will make a lot more progress. Even though there will be, like you said, there will be conflict. I don't disagree with that, and I don't want to avoid conflict, but the conflict, I believe, should be handled in the right way, as opposed to just slinging. Mudslinging doesn't really help any cause. So
yeah, what I always think about is, in 100 years, none of us in the manosphere are going to still be alive.
Right.
We'll all be locked in.
Sure.
And so what does survive is ideas.
Yes.
Ideas can survive. I mean, there are ideas that have survived since ancient times and until now that we still have. And that is why I focus on either promoting or attacking ideas, is because they're actually where the power is. The power is in the idea, not in the individual. And if an idea that an individual is promoting is unhealthy for society, and you can sort of debunk or help people to realize that idea is unhealthy. And sometimes ideas are healthy for an individual when they're in a certain state, and not healthy for that individual at a later point in time. Like we said before, as you grow up, you start to contradict your past self, and there are times to that certain ideas save your life that later almost kill you. Yes. And so you need to know when you need to shift and when you need to follow into a new idea. But I think the destruction and building of ideas is really where the long-term change to society comes from, not from us as individuals. We're like a tool that allows that idea to take life in a human form and actually accomplish something. And it is important, though, the individuals to a certain extent. When I first started doing this, I started to do videos without my face showing. I wasn't anonymous. I used my real name because I wanted people to trust me. But I didn't really make anything about me. I made it all about the information. And that was really hard for people to listen to, because they're like, well, yeah, but how post physique, basically. And, I'm telling them stuff that's just basic common sense knowledge since all of human history. And people are saying post physique, or we don't believe you. Exactly. It has nothing to do with it, but the message bearer will affect how the message is interpreted. So there is an importance in there, but really it is the message will always outlast the message bearer.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's very, very true. Definitely. That's the key thing, is because, like I said, I have no problem attacking certain philosophies that are destructive and debating those philosophies. But it is, again, I go back to even, just with the debating of philosophies to On Liberty, John Stuart Mill's, where he talks about this idea of letting even bad ideas have their place, because it reaffirms why your good ideas are good, right? And it's like you have to constantly be testing it. You can't just be like, oh no, that's wrong. We don't listen to that because that's wrong. It's like, no, you have to constantly allow that to exist so that you can constantly sharpen your sword. It tells you why what you believe is right. It provides the counter example. And if you can't stand up, if your best argument against an idea, philosophy is, oh yeah, that's evil, or that's bad, or that's wrong, then you really aren't standing on very, very strong ground yourself. So I guess it's just a way of saying that I agree with you in the idea that things shake themselves out, as long as we create that environment for them to do so, which I, like I said, I would like to see more of that cross pollination happening, as opposed to the kind of splintering that we have now, where it's on people as opposed to ideas. So
it's interesting too that my personal experience with organizations that go through this is that often the most powerful 2 or 3 factions destroy each other, and it's the 4th or 5th faction that ends up with power. And it's often not necessary. It's often the faction that tries to go middle of the road for one reason or another, and tries to basically pick up the pieces after the war. And this is not a prediction. This is just the kind of thing that tends to happen. So it is good, if we really care about the things that we're teaching, the ideas that we're promoting, that we don't just, if we are involved in a fight, we don't just fight, but we also we fight and we recruit.
Yeah, because
sometimes you end up in the middle of a fight realizing this happened after the U.S. Civil War. At the end of the war, all the dead soldiers were considered veterans. All of the soldiers were considered veterans. They were considered equal. And there was a reunification, and that didn't go super well, but there was a reunification. And this tends to be what happens after a civil war. And you could say it's kind of like a civil war right now in the manosphere. And there always is a coming together afterwards. There's not necessarily coming together with everyone, but there always ends up being a gravitational pull back towards the center again. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm as I said, I'm focused on the information and focus on specifically on helping people, and try to stay out of the actual war myself.
Yeah. 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 Same here. Except I suppose that I'm trying to get as many people on different sides onto my channel and just so that yeah, I guess it's so that everyone is heard and that you're not taking sides, or I'm on my own side. I'm on my own team. I'm on the team Bulldog mindset, helping men. I don't have any horse in any other game. So
Excellent. It was wonderful talking today, John. And if you want to find out John's website, it's in the comment, or not in the comments, in the description beneath the video. You can have a look there and go take his test. How many questions are on the test?
Just 10. Yep.
Just 10 questions. 10 questions. You get a score on 1 to 100, and then you can talk to John about how to develop your Bulldog mindset. Thank you very much, John. It's been wonderful having everyone here today. And that's all.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you for watching our video, and I hope it inspired you to take action in your life. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video to get more agency building content. The real secret sauce is in our newsletter. Click on the link in the video description below to sign up. I promise I won't flood your inbox, and anything that we do send you will be of high value.